Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Matthew Brown. This is Dental Unfiltered. Today, Dr. Vallo was not able to attend recording, but we had a really important topic we wanted to attack and bring up, and it's something we've been talking about now for a while to put on our list of subjects to handle. And we had a subject matter expert that contacted us, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to have the recording done for you guys, and Andrew just wasn't able to attend. So the subject we're talking about today, guys, is board complaints. And in reality, these things happen, and I deal with you guys every day. And you guys call me, or you call somebody, and you're in a panic, and it's like, I got noticed that I'm in the middle of a board investigation, and it's your first time in your career, and your heart's beating fast, and everything's going through your mind of losing your license and fines and law, like all these negative things are going through your mind, and it's scary. It's like getting surprise divorce papers or surprise being served for you being sued. Like when it happens, it kind of takes you. Sometimes it totally blindsides you. So, the emotions of it sucks, and the reality of handling it sucks more. So we have Justin Withrow with us today. He's from a law firm that handles this in many, many states, and they're trying to constantly change regulations and make things better for dentists, and they're also helping dentists out. And I want to have Justin on, have him tell us a little bit about him and his firm. And I want to kind of talk through this and see what the realities of things are and what most cases are like, and how should you really handle it, and what should your mindset be going into this. So first, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your law firm, kind of your experience, and kind of like the basic fundamentals of what you guys do.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation this afternoon. So I'm a partner at the law firm Flannery Georgalis. I'm based in our firm's Cleveland, Ohio office. That's the founding office for our firm. We also have offices in Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Charlotte, North Carolina. And from there, our lawyers are licensed in several other states. And so we handle matters all over the country. I lead our firm's dental practice group, where I focus my time representing dentists, dental practices, group practices with multiple locations in sensitive matters. So whether it be a board complaint, like we're going to be talking about here today, a insurance audit, a regulatory investigation by a state or federal agency, and then complex business disputes. So our firm, traditionally, we like to consider ourselves a sensitive matters firm. So anytime we are that break glass in case of emergency, that red phone you call, whether it be a sophisticated business person or a business that is dealing with a complicated issue. Sometimes it can just be purely civil. Sometimes it can involve criminal ramifications, but we represent sophisticated business individuals and businesses in these regulatory enforcement actions. And so I think you described a board complaint really well. It can be that how did this happen moment, and it can totally catch a provider and a practice off guard. And they can start in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you could receive a letter in the mail. You could receive an email from a board or a board investigator. Other times that investigator may show up at your office unannounced. And I think what's most important for everybody to realize is just because you've been identified for investigation, typically because of a third-party complaint, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take it seriously, because you absolutely should, but just because a complaint has been submitted to the board and the board is conducting an investigation, it doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be disciplinary action taken against your license.
Docs get it, right? They get the board complaint. They come in a variety of forms, right? And the first thing they start thinking about is their license and their income and their future. So if I was one of your clients and I called you and said, "Hey, Justin, I just got my first board complaint," what would be the first words you told me to put my mind at ease?
I would say check your malpractice policy. So Oftentimes providers have a misconception as to what a malpractice policy is and what it can cover.
Okay.
And so a malpractice policy, in addition to being a resource when you've been sued for malpractice, there's also typically coverage for board investigations. And
I did not know that.
Not every policy, but a lot of policies. And if a listener to this podcast doesn't have that rider in their policy, they should consider adding it. because anytime a complaint is filed and you're put on notice of an investigation by the board, that should trigger a claim to your malpractice policy. And at times, the policy, again, depending on the amount of coverage that you can have upwards of $25,000 to $50,000 in defense cost coverage in that board disciplinary action.
Would it cover fines and the legal fees?
It really depends. I've not seen a policy where it's going to cover a fine if a fine was imposed, if that state board had the authority to impose fines. Here in Ohio, the board's not permitted to impose a fine. That's something that they're considering revising, but as we sit here today, they do not. But typically, it will only cover defense costs, so legal fees, and if you needed to bring on an expert, you could utilize those fees for that as well.
Now, earlier before you came on, before we started recording, we were talking about dental board regulations in the form of marketing and stuff. But you guys handle this all the time. What is the most common dental board violation that you see? What's the most common investigation starter? This
is not going to surprise anybody, but it's a patient that complains about an adverse outcome of treatment. Either they felt that a procedure wasn't properly explained to them, or their out-of-pocket cost wasn't properly explained to them. And so because they feel like they have no other recourse, they submit a complaint to the dental board. And again, that doesn't mean that anything adverse is going to happen to your license. So when a licensing board receives a complaint from a third party, typically it's going to be a patient, or it could be a disgruntled current or former employee or a competitor. Traditionally, those are the most frequent third-party complaints. They have a duty to investigate. And it's at that investigation stage where if a licensee, does things the right way, addresses, and responds to the complaint appropriately, that's where you have the best shot of taking the complaint and having it closed out at the complaint phase, where the board determines that there's no need to escalate this investigation into a prosecution. There's no need to implement formal administrative charges against this licensee, and that even if there was an adverse outcome from a procedure, or even if there was a misunderstanding regarding, the financial responsibilities of a patient for a procedure, that doesn't mean that there's been a violation of the Dental Practice Act requiring disciplinary action be imposed against that dentist.
Generally, so we get a notice or an email or an investigator shows up, right? So that's phase one. The becoming aware of the investigations first. That's the shock, right? And then we kind of ease into, okay, this is happening. So I check my malpractice insurance. I have coverage. I contact the lawyer and I say, hey, Justin Withrow to represent me. Do docs ever try to not get a lawyer involved and try to handle the board on their own? Because it seems like that would be a really bad idea.
I agree with you. And unfortunately, the answer is a resounding yes. I would say more frequently than not, doctors, and this isn't exclusive to dentists, but if they receive a complaint from the board, and again, depending on the state that you're in, you may receive the actual complaint in which you're supposed to respond to. In certain states, and not to use Ohio again as an example, but in Ohio, you don't actually receive a copy of the complaint that's been filed against you. And in some instances, you don't even know who the complainant is. Oftentimes, they will come to you with a subpoena for certain records, and then you can generally discern, well, okay, they're asking for this patient's record, so there must be some issue with the treatment that I provided to this patient. But getting back to your question, yes, I think too often I'm contacted after the doctor has already tried to respond to the complaint and hasn't really done as quality of response as they could have to try to knock out the complaint again at this investigation phase. I always like to take the approach of you try to kill a fly with an atomic bomb. So we don't want this complaint to escalate any further than the investigation phase. We may believe, and the dentist may believe, that upon reading this complaint, that this complaint has absolutely no merit whatsoever. Well, that doesn't mean that we can mail in our response. We still have to respond, as thoroughly and as professionally as possible to show the investigator and prove to the board that this is not a complaint that you want to expend your resources on pursuing against this licensee. This complaint has no merit and it should stop at this stage.
So it's just like, I mean, they're technically a regulatory board, not a criminal or a law enforcement agency, but it's just like you get arrested, don't say anything, plead the fifth, shut up, call your lawyer, let them do the talking and handle it, and you have the best probability of an outcome. Now, do you think dentists, I know how dentists think. Like, dentists are very concerned about how their colleagues in the immediate region perceive them. I know dental board complaints and the board investigations become public on the dental board website, right? Because,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so they can.
They can, right? So do they avoid the lawyer because they think it makes them look guilty?
I think there is that mentality. I field phone calls, again, and this isn't exclusive to dentists, but where I get contacted and they want to hire me to help them with a situation, but they often ask, well, if I get a lawyer involved, is it going to make the other side think that I'm in some way guilty because I've hired a lawyer? And the answer is no. You have a right to be represented by counsel. And so you should certainly avail yourself of that right. It's such a misconception that by hiring a lawyer, that's sort of a tacit explanation of I've done something wrong, because I wouldn't hire a lawyer to help me with this absent being guilty of something. And so in states, and in certain states, there's an obligation to cooperate in a board investigation. In those states, it's even more imperative that you engage counsel as early as you can, really as soon as you learn that there's an investigation that you are the subject of, so that you don't make those missteps that could take a situation that could have been resolved at the investigation phase and wind up where you're facing administrative charges that are now public on the dental board's website and are visible to your peers, visible to your competitors, and visible to your patient base that could ultimately have an impact on your financial well-being.
There's really no scenario where you shouldn't contact a lawyer. So it's just like you get pulled over the side of the road, for whatever reason the cops get you out of the car, they start putting handcuffs on, you start getting your Miranda rights read. I want to call my attorney. That's it. They show up at your office, they serve you with papers, you get an email, you don't say anything, you call a lawyer, let the lawyer contact them and say, we know about it. Just don't get involved.
That's certainly my advice.
Yeah.
Unless it's just a clear misunderstanding, whether it be, the complainant has identified the wrong professional, something crazy like that, where it's a mistake. Absent that, I don't know why a dentist would want to try to handle the disciplinary process alone.
So 9 times out of 10, if you're saying to yourself, Mr. Dentist, should I really get a lawyer? Chances are you should. If you're like, oh, this name is close to my name, but the doc around the corner has the same name, and they just served the wrong guy, you can contact the board and say, hey, this isn't my patient or whatever, and
right.
They're the wrong guy. But if that's not it, you just contact a lawyer right away. Shut up, call a lawyer, let them handle it.
Absolutely.
Once the dental board serves you with papers or notifies you of the investigation, you contact your lawyer. Generally, on average, like I know in some instances it'll be really quick, in some instances it'll be long. But how long does a dental board investigation normally hang over your head? How long does this dark cloud kind of hang over you?
Several months, and that's due in part to the number of complaints that boards are inundated with that they have a duty to investigate, the relatively small number of investigators that boards have on staff to investigate those complaints, and then the procedural process that investigations have to undergo from the board perspective. So boards typically meet on a monthly basis. Well, if an investigation is commenced in 1 month, you respond the next month, the board, and generally speaking, a sub portion of the board, have some involvement as to what's going to happen with that complaint after the licensee has responded to it. And if a board doesn't meet for 1 month or 2 months, well, that process is being delayed. the investigators don't have the authority to close out investigations on their own. They're serving as the investigative arm for the board, and it's only the board through its board members that have the authority to take action, whether it be to institute formal charges or close out the investigation and find there's no reason to proceed with formal charges. And because boards, they're volunteer positions, they only meet on a monthly basis. So it can drag on for several months.
So I'm trying to figure out who the doc is who volunteers for the board. So you have this body of docs in a state, and probably they're older docs that have been in the state for a long time. Things are changing. Maybe they're not quite in touch with things, right? And this is a volunteer job. It's an honor to do it, but it's a volunteer job. And there really isn't a motivation to get this done quickly for you at all, because all we have is time, and it doesn't really hurt them at all. So do boards tend to, I know they're there for two reasons, right? They're there to protect the patient, and they're there to make just checks and balances on the practice, right? They really have two different loyalties to two different groups. Right. And the two collide, which has got to be for board members, it's got to be a hard job, right? Like, docs are our colleagues, and we have to kind of keep them in balance, right? And then we have to protect the patient, because that's where our oath is and our responsibility is. Do you find boards in certain states lean very one direction versus the other in their culture of who they are more loyal to?
Yeah, I do think there are certain states that, have a reputation as being harsher on the dentist than others. I don't want to get myself in trouble and name any names.
I can say a few I know for sure. New York, North Carolina, New Jersey. I can name them. I know what states they are. I'm not a dentist. I'm not you. I don't have to know these people. I know a few of them. I know New York, New Jersey, North Carolina suck. I know is that New Hampshire is really hard. Massachusetts is. Yeah. And some are like iron fisted with the docs.
You've certainly named a few that, in my experiences, are very difficult on the licensee. And I think that's one of our approaches when I'm hired by a dentist and we're writing the response. We're trying to write the response to that dentist board member that's going to be looking at our response and going to be evaluating and making a decision on whether this is a situation that warrants further disciplinary action. And so we want to try to take that board member, who there are public members of boards, but I'm writing to the dentist, and I want to try to bring them into the practice and the doctor that I'm representing, and have them visualize if they were in my client's position, and to help them appreciate the circumstances of whatever the issue was and why, there may have been an adverse outcome of a procedure or whatever the circumstances were, but that doesn't mean that there needs to be disciplinary action taken against the licensee. I think it can be very difficult for board members at times, and I've had the opportunity to chat with board members or dentists that have served on boards in their respective states, and I think they underappreciated sort of the amount of police power that they were going to have to utilize during their time to impose disciplinary action on their peers, and how difficult that can be. I don't think I hope anyway, that nobody, solicits an opportunity to be on the board with excitement to impose discipline on their fellow colleagues.
No, I doubt it. Yeah, definitely.
But it can be a very difficult thing. And so when we're representing a dentist, we always want, again, try to bring that board member, have them try to walk in my client's shoes, understand and appreciate the circumstances in the situation. And generally speaking, that's been a successful approach, where they can understand and visualize themselves in my client's shoes and understand how sometimes things just go wrong. And it doesn't mean that it was a situation that necessitates disciplinary action. Because I think at times what dentists fail to appreciate is the gravity of disciplinary action against their license. And so what I mean by that is, if even a public reprimand, which in most jurisdictions is the lowest level of sanction, reportable sanction against a dentist, it's just a letter that says you've been reprimanded. But that gets reported to the National Practitioners Data Bank. And so that is essentially a medical professional's report card.
It's like their credit bureau, like their medical, like I'm a provider credit bureau.
That's exactly right.
It's like Equifax for how good of a doc. Well, Equifax for like, how many problems have I had in my career that have made it far enough for an investigation?
That's exactly right. And those one report can have a snowball effect. And so let me just give you an example. I represented an oral surgeon in a board investigation in which we agreed to a public reprimand. Well, that oral surgeon had been licensed in 2 other states. Both of those licenses were inactive at the time of this reprimand, but the board had authority to take or to at least initiate disciplinary action against my client because of the discipline in the state in which they were practicing. So we had to resolve disciplinary actions in those 2 states. And then he faced a letter of inquiry from AAOMS, and then he had several letters from insurance companies in which he was an in-network provider. We had to explain the circumstances there. And then he also had privileges at 3 different hospitals. We had to explain the situation there. And by the end of when we finally said our representation is over, we had responded to 13 different letters of inquiry regarding that public reprimand.
And now that's all public. It's all public record now, right?
Well, the reprimand is public record. And fortunately, none of the other entities took any action as a result of that reprimand. But I think it's a good example to highlight that even the lowest level of disciplinary action can result in what seems like a never-ending, inquiry into that event. And so it's important for dentists to realize that you need to take investigations by the board seriously, because it can be a situation that will last with you for years and years and years, and it can be debilitating. I mean, this oral surgeon was ready to quit because he just couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
Every day it seemed like he was getting another letter asking, we need to understand the circumstances, and we're evaluating whether, you're still a good partner for us. And after a while, you begin to think, well, should I be doing this anymore? Over, again, a reprimand.
Let's say you handle 100 board complaints, right? For a number. When you dig into the first part of the board complaint, right, and you get all the, I'm sure the docs are pretty honest with you, like, yeah, I jacked up, bro. Or, hey, I didn't. I was doing normal standard of care, normal continuity care. Everything was fine. This just happened. It's an anomaly. Like, out of like 100, how many are like, ooh, this is going to be bad? And how many are like, hey, bro, you got nothing to worry about. Just relax. Give us time. All it's going to take is time. We're going to take care of this. Like, what percentage is like, you should really be legitimately worried about the safety of your license and that kind of stuff? And how many are like, hey man, wrong, bad luck, wrong time, wrong place. We're going to help you and get you out of this. Don't worry about it. The board's going to work with you. What is the percentage of the difference of those two?
So I would say somewhere between 25 to 30% is, hey, this is a really bad situation.
So you have like a 1/3 chance almost, or 25% chance that this is pretty bad.
Yeah.
That's pretty high. That's higher. I thought you were going to say less.
Now, it could be those are just the cases that I tend to get. There are, and more so recently, I think with implants have been a high area of focus for dental board.
Implants last 5 years have exploded. Makes sense.
Yes. IV and sedation. Sedation is another high area. So I get a lot of those types of cases. And I think, because those are, intensive, procedures, and anytime you have sedation, there's a high risk of complications. So that may skew the number higher. But it's a very real possibility where a client comes to me and we're trying to fight off the prospects of a summary suspension. And so a summary suspension is when the board has made the determination that, this provider is at such a risk to the community that we need to suspend their license to prevent them from practicing while we continue to investigate this particular complaint. Now, that doesn't happen. That's not the 25 to 30%. I would say that's more like the 5 to 10% scenario. But when that happens, that can have a debilitating impact on that person's practice. I mean, you have weeks
On their
of
life, it
patients
shuts
on the
their life
schedules.
down, shuts their financial
Exactly.
future down.
Exactly. And with no real notice that it's coming. And so all the more reason why, it's important to have a protocol and an appreciation for, if I get contacted by a board investigator or I receive a letter from an insurance company that I'm being selected for an audit, we have to have a process in place. We have to have a protocol on how we're going to respond. And we have to take every inquiry seriously.
We have maybe 180 practices in our stable, and a lot of them have 2 and 3 docs.
Mhm.
And like, I probably every couple months somebody calls me and is like, "Hey man, I'm getting investigated," and they're honestly just wanting the vent. They just call and they're
Yeah.
like, I'm just like, this is the worst experience of my life," and I'm like, "You're not getting charged with murder. Your freedom's not in jeopardy, but your license is your financial freedom, and you should be scared. Just take it one step at a time." But I can see, like, if I was a dentist, I spent 10 years in school. I'm $1 million in debt between my practice and my student loans. I'm only a few years into paying all that. And all of a sudden, this letter shows up that just has the potential to limit me from ever paying any of that back. And honestly, it has the potential to erase 10 years of my life of education of being effective and useful. It doesn't mean like it doesn't have to, but the potential's there. That's just terrifying. And probably every couple months, I get a doctor calls me and just tells me all about it. And I'm like, man, that sucks. And it's interesting because it's like, I feel like the dental board gets kind of a boogeyman reputation. But I mean, like, on the other side of it, like, they have to do it. Like, if a consumer comes to them and says, "Hey, I think this happened to me," whatever it is, they have to go look into it. What sucks for the dentist is if you don't know it's coming, it feels kind of like you got ambushed.
No, absolutely. And, I hear it all the time. It's, this investigation is eating at me. I have a hard time eating. I have a hard time sleeping. And I'm questioning my clinical judgment, day in, day out with patients. Like, I'm worried that I'm going to make another mistake and it's going to make that investigation even bigger and put me under even a bigger microscope than I already am.
It kind of erodes their clinical bravery and their clinical confidence immediately. So I had a doc worked with us, and he got in trouble. Basically, there was a site inspection, IV sedation.
Mhm.
IV sedation in a couple of states right now is like a total witch hunt. Like, they're going after it hard. And doc had like 2 vials of expired drugs expired last month. I hadn't removed them yet. That's all it was. But it was a second dental board investigation involving IV sedation. It was number 2. And I think they stopped him from doing sedation for 6 months. And then after that, I think he had to bring an outside provider in, like a dental anesthesiologist instead or something like that. I think he lost his privileges for that. I don't know what it was. But like, he was at a point where in his head, he's like, I almost want to do no dentistry now, just hire associates.
Right.
And just maintain just protect my license now.
Right.
The guy talked to me a lot about it, and it totally eroded his clinical bravery like that. Like, instantaneously, a 10, 15-year practicing doc who went to a good school, who never had a problem, in like 2 or 3 years had 2, and instantly he was second guessing himself clinically. And I mean, that's not good for the patient, not good for him, not good for anybody. That sucks to be in that mental state, right? So, they get through the investigation, it's over with. If somebody wanted to like contact you for representation, what is the best way to contact you and that kind of thing? And can you guys represent somebody in every single state in the country?
So the best way to reach out to me is, I would encourage folks to go to our website. It's flannerygeorgialis.com. You can Google my name, Justin Withrow, and I know Flannery Georgialis is a mouthful. So
Yeah.
if you Google that, you should be able to find me. I'm based again in Cleveland, Ohio. I've represented licensees, across the country, and really depending on the circumstances, there may not be a need to bring in local counsel, but because I'm licensed to practice in Ohio, Michigan, and West Virginia, working on Virginia. And where I'm approached by an individual in a state where I'm not licensed, or there's not a member of my firm that's licensed in that particular state, we may have the need to bring on local counsel. What happens a lot for me is that I'm asked to consult with a lawyer from the licensee's malpractice that's been assigned to them through their carrier and just provide, a second set of eyes or a second voice of expertise to a situation, when they want to have, depending on the severity of the investigation, when they want to ensure that they're getting as sound of advice as possible. So the answer is yes, with a little caveat.
So that's something contact you. Justin, this has been a subject we've wanted to tackle an episode on for a while, because like I deal with the docs. They call me, they call whoever they deal with in the professional environment. Like, man, going through a board investigation, especially people that they know who talk to multiple docs a day and work with lots of docs. Like, I deal with so many. Like, have you ever had this happen to anybody? I'm like, yeah, every couple months. I hear about it all the time, actually. When you have tons of dentists in your life, every few months somebody's getting investigated, right? And I never knew a lot about it, and I just talked to them about, like, you didn't kill anybody, you're not going to jail, you just have to get through it. But the gravity of it, I don't think people think about it and understand it until that letter's in their hand and they get that sick feeling in their stomach. And honestly, we said earlier, I'm actually going to make a post in the Dental Nachos and Nifty 50 Facebook group to see if people know about this. I didn't realize you could get that rider on malpractice insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was talking to young dentists coming out of school and they're going to buy their first practice, they're starting to practice and they do malpractice insurance, I'd be like, you don't get a policy unless you get that rider.
Absolutely.
It's like it's kind of like not having life insurance. This is a really bad analogy. Someone's going to criticize me. It's like you have a loved one that passes away and you don't get life insurance on them. So you're dealing with the grief and you're dealing with paying for the funeral, right? Here it's like you're getting a dental board investigation. Let's say you're a newer dentist or whatever your scenario is. Like, no one wants to throw away 30 to 50 grand on defending yourself for something you might not need to, right? And when you have the malpractice insurance, it at least lifts that part of the burden off of you if you have that rider. So like, I personally, I'm going to start talking about it a lot more when we come with the subject. Like, you need to have this rider. If you don't, go home and get it, because it doesn't make sense to not have it. It's like, it doesn't make any sense at all.
You're so right. And I think what's important for everyone to understand is that it's not $25,000 for the lifetime of your policy. It's from one claim year to the next. So if unfortunately you had one claim and let's say your policy renewed on the first of every year, well, you had one in 2024, and then unfortunately you had another complaint that you needed counsel for in 2025, in all likelihood, your policy is going to renew that coverage, and so you would have another $25,000 because it would be a new claim. It's been very valuable for certain clients of mine who, exactly as you described, they were a younger dentist. They're entering, their professional phase of their career with, significant amounts of student debt, and they don't have the necessary resources to appropriately defend themselves, in a board investigation. Well, come to find out, they have this $25,000, $50,000 in coverage in their policy, and it really allowed them to have the appropriate defense that they needed. In other situations, they just they can't afford it. And that can be incredibly challenging, because while you should have counsel to represent you in a dental board investigation, you don't have a right to one. No one. It's not like
there's
when
no
you're
public
charged
defenders.
with a criminal. Exactly right.
There's no public defender.
It's not like when you're charged with a crime and the court will appoint you a lawyer if you can't afford one. That doesn't exist in the professional disciplinary action world. So you either hire one and can afford one, and you pay for what you get for, or you try to do it alone. And for all the reasons we chatted about here today, that is not the right solution.
For instance, you're a younger doc, you did 4 or 5 years as an associate, you're an NYU grad, you got $600K, and I think NYU is roughly like $600K in debt right now. You go get your first practice loan, you buy your first practice, call it 1.1, we're at 1.7 in debt, right? You probably have multiple tens of thousands of dollars in monthly debt service, right? Your practice is running near break even if you're lucky. You're still working as an associate 2 days a week, 3 days a week in your practice. All of a sudden this happens. There's no money to pay for it.
Right.
Like, you're choosing between providing for your family and paying for your dental board investigation over the next few months. So like, I almost think it's probably some of the best advice a young dentist can get is like, go get your malpractice insurance and make sure you got the dental board rider for getting coverage for defense, for having a defense coverage. Justin, this is a really awesome episode, very informative. I'm really excited we got to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Hey guys, make sure you listen. Me and Andrew and the team here at Dental Unfiltered, there's about 5 staff members behind the scenes to help with this. There is no sponsorships being sold, no money being made. It's purely done for you guys. We bring worthwhile content. Please like, subscribe, follow, and leave us a review. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.